Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is going to be the material for sessions 33 and 34. The timelines that we have been handing out, by the way, if somebody, Paul, I know you don't have one of these, so I'll pass these back, and there'll be a few extra. Can I get you, Carolyn, to hand those on back? And if there's anybody else that hasn't ever gotten one of these timelines, you're going to wind up needing that tonight. And so I hope you brought your timeline with you. If not, you can make a note and add some things to it as we go on. But we've been talking about the fact that on this timeline, that back here, there was a time when Satan began working, and he brought the old world. Remember, we saw that reference over in Peter. He brought the old world to a place where it had become the world of the ungodly. And now we're coming to a place where we understand that that is not just a general way of describing things. It is actually describing the status of the world. And then, of course, when they got off the boat, all those people knew God, and they knew some things about God. As men began to multiply on the face of the earth, Satan begins to bring the darkness of his untruths into the world to replace the light of the truth. The most basic light being the light of God consciousness. Who is the true and living God? When they all got off the boat, all 8 people knew who the true and living God was. But as time went on, Satan began to replace the light of God consciousness with some people, so that, as Paul describes, they began to worship, four-footed beasts and creeping things and the birds of the air, until finally they worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator. And when the balance shifted, before, it was weighted with the knowledge of the true and living God. But as Satan began to replace that light of the truth with the darkness of his untruths, there came a time when the balance shifted, and men served the creature more than they served the Creator. And that brought about a condition that we call that the prevailing darkness brought in a condition in the world that we called the night. And we saw that back there, and I think it's on your chart about Genesis 17 or 18. Is it 17 there? That's when that really the shift began to take, and from that time you have now the increasing darkness of Satan's night, where it is not enough just to weigh things in his favor, but now what he's doing is he is going after all of the truth to replace it with a carefully crafted and designed untruth that is made to be more attractive and more desirable to people. And so that way, and that's one of the reasons why, by the way, when someone believes that Satan's replacement truth, one of the reasons they hold to it so strongly is because it just sounds so much better to them oftentimes than the truth, and certainly more desirable than the truth. And so as we're doing this, as he began to redevelop that, and he brought that night condition back into being, because when the world understood God more than they did not, that was a day condition, and now it's a night condition. And really, what I ought to do is I ought to kind of do this thing like this. This was an increasing of the ungodliness of the world, and it kind of came to and then the flood came in, and because of that flood, God wiped all of that over and kind of reset everything. And now the night is coming again. And so here's what we learned. We learned that night got to the same place again. It just took longer to get it there this time, because remember, at the flood, God put some things in place that slowed that down. And so back over here, you had the cross, and here that started the public ministry of Jesus, and they had rejected all 3 members of the Godhead. The Father was rejected, and then he sent his Son, and both the world, remember, there was that dual thing, the world and Israel. The world was made by him, and the world what? Knew him not. And he came unto his own, and his own what? received him not. So there was that dual rejection of the Father and of the Son. We saw the testimony of Jesus and that they hate me because they hate the Father also. And then in that extension of mercy that followed right there was the rejection of the third member of the Godhead, of the Spirit, where Peter says over there in Acts chapter 4 that Psalm 2 was being fulfilled, where both the Gentiles and the nation of Israel were saying about God and His Christ, let us break their bands asunder and cast their cords from us. We don't want God. We don't want to be accountable to God. We don't want to have anything to do with Him. And although there were some members of a believing remnant, they were only that. They were only a remnant. And so the world and Israel, the world at large and Israel at large, and by the way, the world at large, I mean, the world is just plunged into paganism. When Paul, remember, goes over there to Mars Hill, he sees all those idols that are made to every god imaginable except the true and living God. I mean, if you're going to miss one out of every possibility, that's the one. That's not an accident. That's not coincidence. And so the world gets back to the place where at the stoning of Stephen, it has once again become the world of the ungodly. And that is a status that Satan has been working toward, remember, so that he would earn the right to bring his Christ into the world. But before he did that, God interrupted his program with Israel. And because of what he was doing here, he was also, in this dispensation of grace, he was also postponing Satan's ability to bring his Christ into the world. Now, this is where we left off the last time. And what he did was, at that time, even though Satan's night, I should have just put that here in this, because that night is always increasing in darkness. And what he did is, even though that night is still continuing during this dispensation of grace, when Paul says in Romans 13:12, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, he's talking about the condition of Satan's night when this dispensation of grace interrupted all that was going on. That it was at its far spent condition, not fully spent, but far spent, which means it had come right up to the point of fulfilling what it was intended to fulfill. And now during this dispensation of grace, he has some particular things called works of darkness that he is using to continue the darkness of his night, which is why in the rest of verse 12, we're going to be called to let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. And that study, folks, that portion of our study is right around the corner, as they say. And so it is in Satan's best interest to keep, by means of his works of darkness, the blackness of his night. And when I say that, I'm not just trying to describe it, I'm saying the untruths that have unseated and replaced the truth. It's important that he use the works of darkness to keep the blackness of his night of untruth being the prevalent way of thinking and living and conducting ourselves, so that once this thing is over, it's going to take up right where it left off, and this night is now going to come to its zenith by what Satan is going to do. And it is in this area right here, because what follows, as I've always used this little icon for Daniel's 70th week, or we could call it the day of the Lord's wrath, and or the tribulation, as we've gotten used to calling it over the years. That day, and by the way, that day, the Lord is using the judgments of that day to dispel the darkness of Satan's night. That terminology is not accidental, but it's describing what God is doing in the world at that time. And so, and of course, following that, I need to just complete this timeline, because we're going to plug some things in out here. There's some things that will take place during all of that, and then we'll do this. And this is when the Lord sets up his kingdom. Now you've got all of that on your timeline, and now and so what we're doing now is we're beginning to examine that when Satan had finally, with the rejection of all three members of the Godhead, the world officially again became the world of the ungodly. And as we did all of those scriptures, remember, they reached a point of no return. In other words, there's nothing the world could now do that would make God go back and change his mind and decide he's not going to judge the world. They had gone too far. But and by the way, that's fine with Satan, because by what he accomplished here in the rejection of all three members of the Godhead, he is now poised to have what I've referred to from time to time as his finest hour. This is the zenith of his plan has been working toward all along. And it is, just so everybody understands it, what he's about to do is going to give him his best opportunity to maintain his usurped possession of the earth. That's what he's after. He's trying to hang on to what he has taken and to keep God from repossessing it. And so when he earned the right to do that, by the way, by the time he gets to the end of the extension of mercy, and now they have rejected that testimony of the Spirit through the apostles, and Peter makes a statement, ye do always resist the Holy Ghost. As your fathers did, so do ye. Well, what did their fathers do? They rejected the other members of the Godhead. He said, and you guys have rejected. So now you've got all three members of the Godhead, and that's what Satan needed to produce in the world in order to, if I can say it that way, to legally bring in the next step of what he wanted to do. This idea that both God and Satan are just doing whatever they want to do willy-nilly isn't true. There are rules in place. Remember, and we got to this. Did God know Satan would rebel? Well, of course he did. And if Satan rebelled, couldn't he, the very moment that rebellion crept into his heart, couldn't our Heavenly Father have immediately created a lake of fire and cast him in it? Absolutely. If it didn't happen, it is only because our Heavenly Father chose not to do that. The question then is, well, if he could have done it, and by the way, would God have been righteous in doing that? Absolutely. He could have done that. This was his creation. The potter has power over the clay, does he not? To form a vessel both unto honor and to dishonor. He can do whatever he wants to do with the clay. But God did not do that, because what he is doing is he is proving to all of creation, and this will be an eternal proof that not even Satan will be able to refute, that God is the only wise God, the only qualified and true and worthy possessor of heaven and earth. He's the only one. No one else has the right to that title. And now God is proving that. Satan's boast is, people would rather live in my world than yours. And that's what he's producing here. A repudiation of God, so that he can get now his best chance to bring his king into the world. And now the world will live in his kingdom. But God has a response to that. God says, okay, you know what? You did earn the right to do that, and that is going to happen. By the way, it becomes the subject of what John writes about over there in the book of Revelation. Sure, we're going to let that Antichrist is going to come on the scene. But God says, but I'm going to do something in response to that. In response to your night, I'm going to bring in my day. And I am going to use the light of my day to dispel the darkness of your night. Okay, so my point now, and that brings us up to where we left off, is to say that at this point right here, as soon as, and by the way, don't forget this most important point, that what God did, because when you get to this point right here, Israel, in the midst of the world, Israel and the world had rejected God. And now they have become the irreversible enemy of God. The only ones that aren't are the believing remnant, the members of the remnant, the little flock. They're the only ones who are not. And so God is going to pour out his wrath upon the world. And as he gets ready, and so that would be the next thing. But when he interrupts his program with Israel, it also, of necessity, interrupts what Satan is about to do. Satan's program is not Israel's program. But what Satan needs to do what he has earned the right to now do is a world which is irrevocably at odds with God. That's what he has to, and that's what he's worked to produce, and what he did produce. But when God, and by the way, where were Gentiles at that point right there? Give me a way to describe us Gentiles. We were without God. And the Bible uses a term to say we were far off, right? Well, what God does is when he brings in this dispensation of grace is that Brown, how did I get that? Okay. When he brings that dispensation of grace in, he brings the world by something he had already reserved the right to do. Now I'm going to show you the details of this, so let me just lay it out here. The first thing is, back in the past, God made a provision to deal with Israel in a different way, if he so chose. I am not saying that God was looking back here and subtly giving you indicators of the dispensation of grace. I'm saying he reserved to himself the right to deal with Israel in a different way. And in addition to that, he also accomplished something on the cross through his Son that allowed him to take the world from being in an enemy status with him to now putting them in a whole different position called the reconciling of the world. And as I'm going to say this to you again later, don't confuse that with the saving of the world. The reconciling of the world is the changing of the world's enemy status, doing away with that, what's on your timeline, that middle wall of partition between Jew and Gentile, so that God no longer, when he changes the status of the whole world, listen, he no longer has to deal with Gentiles as though they're far off. Now, and by the way, through Israel's fall, he no longer has to deal with the entire nation as an apostate nation that has rejected him. He is now making of twain, those two, Jew and Gentile, one new man. And we're going to read this verse in a moment, because right in the middle of that verse, he is talking about the only reason that's possible is because God has changed the status of the world from being permanently at odds with him to now being the whole world having the opportunity to be reconciled to him. Everybody with me on that? Because as soon as this is over, let's you know what, I did that too far. I'm sorry. You probably noticed that. It should cut off right there, just like this. Okay, this is the dispensation of grace up here. I shouldn't follow it. When that cuts off, everything will go right back to where it was. The Gentiles are going to be right back in the position they were in previously. Israel is going to go back into the position they were in previously. The status of the whole world is once again going to be irrevocably at odds with God. You understand, the reason this is a program change is because in this program, the world had stepped over the line, the point of no return. In that program, there was nothing that was going to be done to reverse that. The only reason we're enjoying what we enjoy today is because God was doing something through the death, burial, and resurrection of his Son that no one knew about. He was making a provision to reconcile the world unto himself and bring them from being in the status of an enemy to now having the opportunity to be part of one new man that God was calling out, which, by the way, is going to one day repossess the heavenly places. Okay, so with all of that in mind, you say, so as soon as this is over, then this is going to click back into Israel's program, yes. And the Antichrist is going to bring his man on the scene, and he is, but the things that I need you to see are that those are things that are not going to happen immediately. Now, because we could take a long time on this doctrine, and I've only got the first 30 minutes, or what's left of the first 30 minutes to do this, we have to move through this by jumping into the middle of the doctrine. And I apologize for that. I just don't know another way to do it and get it in here in the manner, because I'm only really trying to show you one thing. First of all, I'm trying to show you that as long as the world is in this position of being reconciled to God, Satan cannot bring his Christ into a reconciled world. It is designed to be brought into a world which is the world of the ungodly, which is at odds with and an enemy of God. And that's how he wants to do it, because that's the place where he has the best opportunity to hold on to the world. Because when all of the, and remember we talked about this with regard to the rapture, the blessed hope, that when you take every reconciled person in the world out at the same moment, the only people left in the world are what? Yeah, they're lost, they're unsaved. Now, he has a world full of unsaved people, none of which have been, because even if you're a Jew, if you get saved right here at the end, you're not going into Israel's program. You're now part of what? You're part of the body of Christ. And so as you move, and so when God yanks everyone out of there, that he can now revert the world back to being in the position of not being reconciled to him, but of being the world of the ungodly, because it truly will be down to the last man. And that and when Satan brings his Christ in, and so what I need to show you is there are some things that need to happen that will not be what happens on day one. In other words, the Antichrist cannot stand up and say, when this dispensation of grace is over and what I'm doing in the darkness of my night is able to be resumed, what I'm going to do on day one is bring my Christ in. That's not going to happen, and it's the subject of prophecy, and I want to show it to you. So in order to do that, let me take you to 1 Chronicles chapter 5, and I want you to notice some terminology here. And it says, and the children of the half-tribe of Manasseh dwelt in the land. They increased from Bashan unto Baal-Hermon, and Senir, and unto Mount Hermon. And these were the heads of the house of their fathers. And then he lists all of them, and at the end it says, famous men and heads of the house of their fathers. All I'm trying to show you is that those who came before, there is a reference to them, the heads of their house. And they transgressed against the God of their fathers and went a-whoring after the gods of the people of the land, whom God destroyed before them. And God told them that was going to happen if they didn't destroy them out of there, that they would go after those false gods. And the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tilgath-Pilneser, king of Assyria, and he carried them away, even the Reubenites, the Gadites, half the tribe of Hera. And it says, and to the river Gozan unto this day. Well, what I'm trying to get to here is that there are some Assyrian kings who were the heads of their house. And I need to show these to you because they are the fathers of the Antichrist. And this is what I'm trying to get to. Now, yeah, we're jumping over a lot of stuff, but I hope to connect it up where at least you'll see the main point of what I'm after here. So let me take you now to Habakkuk chapter 3, because it's the head of that house that the Lord is going to be destroying in the day of his wrath. So it says, thou didst march through the land in indignation, thou didst thresh the heathen in anger, thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, even for salvation with thine anointed. Who is that? That's right, that's Jesus Christ. Thou woundest the head out of the house of the wicked. And that's a reference to the Antichrist out here, as he is going to be the head of that house. And we talked about this discovering of the neck last time. Now, take me to Job 41, because there's a couple of ways that the Bible describes Satan. Remember, we talked about the different names, and each of those names is talking about him in a different function. And when he is talked about as some kind of beast, we are talking about him attempting to control the land of Israel, usually by means of another nation on the earth. And so Leviathan is one of those. I actually read this to you last time, so give me that next reference there. And now Revelation 17, let me show you this one. And the angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And so, as we're looking at these, we're going to see that there are some nations now that are assigned to be beasts. I don't know if I have them on the PowerPoint or not. Let me see. Give me the next PowerPoint. No, give me the next one. Just leave it right there. What I'm going to show you is that the 2 nations that come against Israel to remove them out of the land, the northern kingdom is carried away captive by the Assyrians, right? And the southern kingdom later is carried away captive by Babylon. All right. And so what you have in Jeremiah, because Jeremiah is warning about this thing, and actually, you know, some of that is taking place in his lifetime. Look what he says. Israel is a scattered sheep. The lions, plural. The lions have driven him away. First, the king of Assyria hath devoured him. That's lion number 1. And last, this Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, hath broken his bones. That's why he's talking about lions, plural. They're both a lion, and God and those nations are now referred to as a particular beast as they are being utilized against Israel and the land, taking them away captive out of the land. If you look on down through the passage, you can see that the Medo-Persian Empire is pictured as a bear. Grecia is pictured as a leopard. Those are beasts. And so when you see those beasts, you understand that something is happening with Israel in the land, and there's a contention going on there, and they're being utilized for that purpose. All right. And so having seen that, let me take you to this next one. Revelation chapter 17 and verse 3. And so John says, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So let me give you the 7 heads. In fact, he's going to explain about those. So verse 7 says, and the angel said to me, wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth. Now, we read this passage a moment ago, but when he's talking about a beast, you're talking about not... remember in the old days, we used to do it like this. We used to say there was Nimrod's kingdom, and that was the first head of the beast. And then later you had, oh man, I'm not going to remember. I used to teach, huh? Yeah, there was Egypt. Yeah, Egypt was the second head of the beast. And then later you have Assyria was a head of the beast, and then Babylon was a head of the beast, and then the Greece was a head of the beast, and then the Roman Empire was another head of the beast, and that's where everything ran off the rails big time, because now what was going to happen is that the kingdom of the Antichrist was going to be, remember in the old days, the revived Roman Empire. Remember that? And then years later, that went by, and guys sold a lot of books talking about that, and then you come along and you have a thing called the European Union. Woohoo, something new. We can get a new book out. And you just go back and erase revived Roman Empire and write in European Union. And now you can put that book out and everybody goes, woohoo! And you look at that, and look, you can look at things that are happening in the world in every generation and identify something that makes you think that's it. Stop doing that. God doesn't need, I'm going to say this, God doesn't need anything happening here so that when things get out here, suddenly it's all set up and rolling. He doesn't need to do that. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm saying we've misidentified it 10 times in my lifetime. And we've misidentified the Antichrist more than 10 times. I remember when Henry Kissinger was the Antichrist. Hitler was the Antichrist. Mussolini was the Antichrist. The Pope was the Antichrist. Okay, yeah, huh? Yeah. Now, yeah, a little, yeah. And you know what? And we got it by bizarre means. You know, it's kind of like this. They took, you know how they got, let me think which one it was. You know how they got Henry Kissinger as being the Antichrist? They took his name and they took the letters because in Roman numerals, letters have numerical value. And so what they did is they took all of the letters in his name and those letters which could be, which have numerical value, they added them all up and it came to 666.
They did that with Ronald Reagan too, and then he got shot.
The deadly wound, which got, yeah, okay. So, you know, I'm just saying, you look at that stuff, and you know what? Satan is laughing his head off, having a heyday with that, because that does not represent an intelligent understanding. If you knew this whole thing we've been discussing now about Satan's night of darkness and his works of darkness and all of that, if you knew that, you knew that when God interrupted the program, none of that is taking place in a reconciled world. You wouldn't even be tempted to try to pin those things on the timeline. That's why I'm teaching it to you, so that you'll see it's not just my opinion. Satan is waiting. He's saying, look, as soon as this is over, I can bring it into play. And so now we have this beast. And by the way, the point of bringing all that up about all the different heads down through time is that it's not 7 different beasts. It's one beast with 7 heads. Heads of the house. That's why I gave you the Chronicle scripture. They were the heads over the house. And so what you're going to find is that beast that shows up out here, this Antichrist out here, is going to be one in a line of heads over the house of a single beast with 7 heads, not 7 beasts. You can't make one head Assyria and one head Babylon and one head Greece and one head Rome and another head the revived Roman Empire or any such thing, because those would all be different beasts. One beast, 7 heads. Okay, so give me this next one, please, Trent. Let me catch up with my notes and see where I am with this. And so John tells us the number of the heads. There are 7. And now he's going to start to explain it. And there are 7 kings. So the 7 heads are 7 kings. And when he writes, he says, 5 are fallen. 1 is, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Now remember, John is caught out here to Daniel's 70th week. And he says at that time, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and 1's going to come after him, and he's going to continue a short. And the beast that was and is not, he's the 8th, and of the 7, and goeth into perdition. So now you go, wait a minute, there's an 8th? But the beast didn't have 7 heads, 8 heads, it had 7. So he's going to explain this, but let's just keep going for now. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Okay, now let's see, that was verse 10. Okay, so let me give you the 5. I sure hope I put this up there. Oh, I did not. Oh, there they are. Okay, good. All right. By the way, back up that one verse. John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. This is what he's talking about. The Lord's day. Okay, he's not talking about Sunday. He's talking about the day of the Lord. Okay, there's a context there. And behind me I heard a sound as of a great trumpet. All right, now, here's the 5 that are fallen, and they're all listed in your Bible. And here they are. By the way, these are the heads of the house of a single nation. And that nation is Assyria. And as I mentioned to you at the end of the last lesson, over and over again, when the prophets talk about the man of sin who will show up out here, he is called the Assyrian. So that's a big clue about where to go look. So if you're saying it's Assyria, can we go back and see the Assyrian beast being used against the nation of Israel and identify those 5 kings that have come against her? And here they are. Now, when you get those in your head, then you realize that when you get past those, I'm not going to write them in, you've got 2 more to come, and then you've got an 8th, which is of the 7. We'll talk about what that means in just a moment. Let me take you to the next one, Revelation 17:10. No, 10. And it says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, that's number 6. And here's what I'm going to write in here, because this is the way we're going to go back to Daniel and look at him. Because when Daniel writes about the events that Revelation is referring to, this guy is called King of the North. And he says, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And okay, so let me move you now to Daniel chapter 11. And the king of the, by the way, the king of the south. There's a contention here. Down here, you've got the king of the south, which is Egypt, and then up above, you've got Assyria. And the king there is called the king of the north, and in between them is the land area of Israel. And what you have is a contention over that land. And so these kings are fighting back and forth. Now look, I'm about to read a long passage. I don't want you to get bogged down in the details. If you're looking at things here and you're going, I wonder what that is, don't get mentally sidetracked with that. I'm just after one thing, and that is to show you that the king of the north, who will come on the scene once the dispensation of grace is over and Israel's program is resumed, is going to be there for years. I just want to show you this. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And in the end of the years they shall join themselves together. For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. She'll not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army and enter into the fortress of the king of the north. So all I want you to understand from this is that there's an agreement that's trying to be made. It's not being made, so now there's an army that comes from the king of the south, and is coming up. That army is coming up against the king of the north, and shall deal against them and prevail. Verse 8, and shall also carry captives into Egypt. Do you see? There, in the narrative, you're going to get you're going to get identified who is the king of the south, who is the king of the north, or what nations are associated with that. Captives into Egypt, their gods with their princes and with their precious vessels of silver and gold. He shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. So the king of the south is going to come up to the king of the north. He's going to sack him. He's going to bring stuff back into his own land. But his son shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler and come forth and fight with him, even the king of the north. And he'll set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. Can you see? There's a back and forth going on here between the king of the north and the king of the south. That's all I want you to see so far. And when he had taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he cast down many 10,000s, but he'll not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall return and set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mountain, take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. He shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he'll give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, shall not stand on his side, neither before him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then shall he turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. And folks, that is, as far as after the 5 that are fallen, that is king of the north, number 6 in the line, or those 5, or you can all find back before here, this is the first guy that's going to come on the scene once Israel's program is resumed. And you can tell, because of the mention of time, there are years taking place here. Now, do you remember what he said? One is, and one is yet to come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. I just want you to remember that, because I'm going to show, in fact, I've got it in the notes. I didn't realize. And there come 7 kings, 5 are fallen, one is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Now we're going to go back to Daniel 11 and look at the next verse that's going to talk about the next king of the north. Then shall stand up in his estate, in this guy's estate. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Isn't that a short space? Indeed it is. And so all I'm saying is now you've got king of the north, number 7. So you've got this guy who's going to start it out. There's going to be this back and forth for years between Assyria and Egypt. And then you've got king of the north that is going to follow him. He's only there a few days. You say, well, why isn't he there? I don't know. Maybe he has a stroke or a heart attack. I mean, I have no idea. It says not in anger or in battle. So I don't know. Something has happened to them there. So in just a few days, he's gone. So what's going to happen? Now you're going to have the 8th. This is the one that we call the Antichrist, or as Paul calls him, the man of sin. And he's the one that this has all been working toward. And so let's see, that next verse is Revelation 17:10 again. 7 kings, 5 are fallen, one is, the other's not yet come. When he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7. But the beast only has 7 heads. If he is the 8th, it means that somewhere among he is of the 7. So he has been here before. You say, well, where's he going to come from? Well, he's going to come, well, this one doesn't say it, we read it a while ago. He's going to ascend out of the bottomless pit. He's going to be allowed to come back up and do it. And I'll tell you which one this is. Sennacherib. Because it was said that when he was not only taking Israel, when Israel was taken away captive, by the time that he comes against the southern kingdom of Judah, the prophecy was that the Assyrian king was going to be successful against them. You say, but he wasn't. But what God did, of course, there was a boast that was made. Remember? Everybody thinks their God is going to deliver out of the king of Assyria's hand. Nobody ever does. Your God is no different. And that was an insult to God. Why? Because as Israel was supposed to be operating in the land as the light of the world, and the nations were supposed to look at them by their statutes and judgments and their observation of them and say, there is no God like Israel's God. Instead, God said, my name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. And the ultimate evidence of that is when a Gentile king looks at Israel's God and says, your God's no different than any of the other gods. Has that testimony been made in the world by Israel in their land? No. And so God, of course, kills 185,000 Assyrians and they all go home. But he's going to come back. And he's going to do the job that was prophesied he would do. And he will take them. That's why he is the 8th and of the 7. And so what do we got here? 7. Give me this next one in Daniel chapter 11, verse 20. It says, and then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he'll be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. And in his estate, here's this guy coming up now, the 8th, but he is of the 7. So it really only has 7 heads. It says, in his estate shall stand up a vile person, whom shall thou not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Now let me give you this next one, Daniel 11:31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Do you know who this is? We saw Jesus talking about this when he says, the Therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. That's where Daniel was speaking about it. And then this last one, Daniel 11:36, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. And that is exactly what Paul said to the Thessalonians when he explained this issue to them, that there was going to come this guy that was going to be out there, and he was, you know what? At first he was going to come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries, and he's going to be kind to Israel. He's going to rebuild the temple. They're going to institute those sacrifices, and then he's going to set up the abomination that maketh desolate. He's going to put that image there in the holy place of the temple, and then he's going to sit down and proclaim himself to be God. And by the way, many will accept that. It's not that, oh, he did that and now they're all going to turn against him. They're not. Let no man deceive, 2 Thessalonians 2:3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember you not that when I was yet with you I told you these things? And this is what Satan has been working toward all along, to get his man in there and to proclaim to Israel that their God has arrived. That's what he's been working. That's what this night has been focused on all the way through. And now we see him talking about that. But what I want you to understand is that as soon as the dispensation of grace is over, look, we start looking around and we go, well, I tell you, you know what? There's a guy over in the Philippines, and I think he's the Antichrist. Look, you got to understand, there's still some history to take place over there. And if he's in the Philippines, I'm just wondering if he's the head over the house of Assyria. All I'm saying is don't worry about trying to help God. We always felt we need to help God out. Oh, I'm looking at things, this is all lining up with Scripture. No, God doesn't need any help with that. As soon as the world is no longer being reconciled and he yanks every saved person out at the same time and he puts the status of the world right back to the place that it was, it is going to be in this world. You know what? Gentiles are once again far off and without God. You have never known a day in your life like that. Neither has anyone you have ever known. The most wicked, vile person is living in a world that God is reconciling to himself. They have never known what it has been for God to completely cut them off, put them on the other side of the wall, and turn his back, and now focus everything he's doing without them. That's the condition it's going to go to. We don't need to look at how things are shaping up. When a guy picks up a newspaper in one hand and his Bible in the other hand, here's what you know for sure. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. So this is what God is doing in response to what the world had become. No wonder Paul calls it the time of God's long suffering and mercy. This is what God, He is enduring with much long suffering those vessels of wrath fitted to destruction. Remember early in the book of Romans. Paul tells us that's the condition that God's going to. And as soon as this is over, that's exactly where it will go back. And I'm going to tell you, this is how drastic it will be. It will be as though, it did happen, but it will be as though the dispensation of grace never took place. It'll take right back up where it left off. Okay. Now, that brings me to two issues that we need to understand about this. And that is, God has done something that allows him to legally interrupt his program with Israel without violating anything, and at the same time postpone what Satan had earned the right to do, because God earned his right here. through his son on the cross. Satan doesn't earn the right to do what he wants to do until here at the end of the extension of mercy. But remember this. This is something that made it hard for me to get this in my head before. I used to think that when God made a provision for something, he had to do it right then. But you understand that God made a provision to put the world in a whole different status back at the cross, but he did not do that immediately after the cross. He didn't do that until the end of the extension of mercy, when the world had once again become the world of the ungodly. Then God says, this thing I've already made a provision for, now I'm going to bring it into play. Did Satan jump through all the hoops he was supposed to earn the right to do what he was doing? Yes, he did. But because God did his first, he gets to do his first. And he does that at a very particular time, and he knows exactly what he's doing there. And that's why it's important for Satan to keep these works of darkness boiling at a high rate, so that whenever this dispensation of grace is over, and there is no timetable to it like in Israel's program, I know we look at it and we say, things can't get any worse. Surely the coming of the Lord must be near. Do you know how long I've been hearing that? Since I was old enough to hear it. And, okay, Francis says, I'm older and I've been hearing it even longer. Okay, but she's not that much older. But here's my point. You can always look at it and see that. That is not what God is looking at. Because the world had already reached a point of no return. He's not saying the dispensation of grace is going to end when it reaches a point of no return. It's already reached a point of no return. He said, I have decided that I'm going to do something in my grace and mercy and long suffering, that I am going to put the world in a whole different position, and I'm accomplishing something during this dispensation of Gentile grace. And when I'm through accomplishing that, then I'm going to end it. I'm going to yank all the justified people out. I'm going to resume my program with Israel, which is the green light for Satan, who's been on hold now for 2,000 years, to say, finally, I can now continue what I'm doing to bring about the entrance of my Christ into the world and try to establish permanent possession of the earth. And that's what he's after. And so all of that is on hold. And it's not a big deal for God to be able to do that. Okay, so the point I was saying is, God has done something that allows him to do what he has done without being charged anything. But see, someone would look at that and say, well, wait a minute, by the way, and there's all these ideas out there, that what God did was, they said, okay, God is doing something with Israel, but Israel crucified their Messiah, so now he's doing it with Gentiles, and we have replaced Israel. In fact, that's what it's called, replacement theology. With all due respect to those men who hold that belief sincerely, they are sincerely wrong, in my opinion, and I believe in the opinion of our apostle. Because I'm going to show you the verses here. I'm going to tell you, if God, who made promises, listen, and unconditional covenants with this people, does not fulfill those covenants, then you could charge him with unrighteousness. God is not capricious. He doesn't make an unconditional covenant that isn't based on their performance at all, but is based only on himself, and then go, you know what, I had my fingers crossed, you just didn't see. So now I can do it somewhere else. Is it possible for God to make a provision to deal with Israel differently? Yes, but that provision is not to do away with them permanently and never fulfill his promises to them. So replacement theology, while it may look like that's what's happened, is only an admission that I don't understand what was happening up to here and what God has now decided to do with the world. And when that time is over, what must now come to pass? It's just that they don't know. And I'm not trying to say they're bad people. I'm just saying they just don't know. All right, now with that in mind, let me take you over to Romans chapter 9, because this is exactly the question that some people, when Paul is preaching this doctrine, by the way, of what he has done, and he's now, Israel has fallen, and he's now working with Gentiles, and he's reconciling the world to himself, and he's making of twain, Jew and Gentile, one new man. There are Jews that look at that, and you know what they're thinking? Oh, I can't believe he's saying that. We are the chosen people. If that's what your God is doing, he's unrighteous. Paul's going to address this. So in this next verse, no, there you go. What shall we say then? This is where he's going to, by the way, there's a series there of complaints made against God, according, if it's true what Paul is preaching. And here's one he deals with. What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Can Israel truly look at God and cry foul because he is not dealing with them now the way he has dealt with them in the past? No, because, and we're going to look at some verses about that. God has already, okay, I'll just take a minute longer here. God has already made a provision to be able to do this. Let me see if I can't shortcut this. You got your timeline? Let me show you something. Right here, when the world becomes the world then God, at the end of the extension of mercy, write this up above your timeline. Israel's fall. That's Israel's fall. And back here, rejection of Christ, this is their stumble. They stumbled at that stumbling stone, that rock of offense. That's their stumble. And now this is their fall. I'm going to show you this in Paul's epistles here in just a moment. In fact, look at what verse 11 says. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? And what he's saying is two things. So this is very important. Number one, the fall is not the result of the stumble. Have they stumbled that they should fall? In other words, is the reason God interrupted his program because they stumbled? No. No. Did they stumble? Yes. Did God interrupt that program with them that they would fall? Yes. But he didn't do it because they stumbled. Because I got news for you. The majority of the nation out here is going to continue to reject him. That's not the issue. God did this because the world and Israel had come to a place where if he didn't interrupt that program and bring the world into a position of being able to be reconciled unto him, this is the only thing left staring at them. And God says, and instead of pouring out my wrath on them, which they have deserved, and in this program I am bound to do, and by the way, substantiated by his own prophets, God says, there was something I made provision for right here that no one knew about, and that is I could suspend that program and bring the world into a whole new status based on something my son did on the cross. And now the world can be reconciled unto me for as long as I want to do it. But when it's over, he is going to go back and finish up exactly. So here's what Paul says. Have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather through their fall, when I used to read this verse, I got confused about this. Had they stumbled that they should fall? And it looked like, oh, they didn't fall. He says, did they stumble that they should fall? Did their stumble result in a fall? And Paul goes, God forbid. And you go, oh, they didn't fall. He said, but rather through their fall. So, and I'm going, wait a minute. I thought you just got through telling me they didn't fall. What he is saying is the fall is not the result of their stumbling. Have they stumbled that they should fall? No, God forbid. But rather, through their fall, salvation has come to a people that once were without God and far off. And it says salvation has come unto the Gentiles. Okay, now I have to show you another one because the other thing about this is, number two, is that condition, this condition that they now find themselves in is not permanent. In other words, their fallen condition is not going to be that way forever. So the fall is not a result of the stumble, and the fall is not going to be a permanent position. Look in chapter 11, verse 12. Now, if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them be the riches of the Gentile, how much more their fullness? So I want you to see that the same people who fell are the same people who are going to be brought to fullness. And when he talks about fullness, he's not saying your condition's going to improve a little bit over how it is now. When he's talking about their fullness, you know what he's talking about? He's talking about taking all of the promises and all of the covenants and bringing them to pass. That's their fullness. And now on your timeline out here in the kingdom, right, Israel's fullness. So now you have got their stumbling, their fall, and their fullness. And by the way, just so you know, and I'm having to kind of shortcut this, but when you get the notes tomorrow by email, you'll see something in there that tells you that Israel's fullness will be realized when all 5 mandates of the Davidic covenant have been performed by them, for them on the behalf of God. That is their fullness. Okay. And so just to make sure that we understand that this is not, you say, but Mike, see, that's clever, but you know what? God did replace Israel because we're spiritual Israel. No, you're not. That's a term somebody pulled out to try to make a doctrine out of that the Bible does not do. The Bible doesn't teach that doctrine. Let me show you that Paul will identify exactly who he's talking about, Romans 9:3. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh. He's not talking about spiritual brethren. He's talking about flesh and blood generations here, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth, and now look, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of God and the promises. He's being specific here. Do you know who got them? Not spiritual Jews. Israelites according to the flesh. He says, whose are the fathers? And of whom as concerning the flesh, when Christ came, he didn't come as, you know, an American. He came as a Jew according to the flesh. According to the flesh, Christ came, who is overall God bless forever. Amen. And so he's talking about, look, this is the group. Why is it that they can't cry foul for God to do this? Because God made a provision back there that I can deal with them differently if I choose to. And by the way, this different treating of them is not shortchanging them. The only thing, if they want him to treat them according to their program, you better buckle up. The ride is about to get really rough. What he did was he postponed that temporarily and suspended that so he could reconcile them who were irreversibly his enemies, now reconcile them unto himself. That's doing them a favor. They're so out of the thinking of what's going on here, they can't recognize God did them a big favor. And so when someone comes along and says, oh, well, by the way, not only will Israel not be able to cry foul, neither will the adversary, because what he was doing got interrupted. Neither will he be able to cry foul. Everything God has done, he has a perfect right to do, and no one will be able to charge him with unrighteousness. Now, when we come back, there is a second thing that I need us to look at real quick. Oh, man, look, this is, I'm just thinking about. Can I show you one more, and then we'll take our break? For if he's still in the context of Israel and what God has done with them. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world. When he cast them aside, it was for that purpose. What shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? You know what I said? The same ones that got cast away are the same ones he's going to receive again. If it was someone different, it wouldn't be the same group. It would be the replacement group. It's the same group. Okay. Exactly. And so let's just run through the verses. I'll just take a second to do this. I won't do any commentary. Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, remember, without Christ, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope. Those weren't given to us. So when he talks about those are Israelites things, then we know who that is. Okay, give me this next one. But now in Christ Jesus, ye who sometimes were far off, that's where we were there, you're now made nigh by the blood of Christ. God was in his Son making a provision to be able to do this. Ephesians 2:4, for he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in the ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace. And by the way, if you're going to go back to here and think this program hasn't changed, he wasn't about to come and preach peace. He was about to come and preach wrath. And that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross. See, he made that provision here, that knowing the world is going to get itself in a position where they're going to have to be destroyed. And God said, you know what? But I'm making a provision right here that when they get to that point, before it all comes tumbling out, I'm going to interrupt that thing, and I'm going to give the world an opportunity to be reconciled unto me. And here's what else no one knew. And all of those, be they Jew or Gentile, that are reconciled unto me, I'm going to make them part of my Son's body, the one new man, and I'm going to utilize them to repossess the heavenly places back to me. Which is why, that's what is in mind when it says, for if they had known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They had no idea what God was doing in his Son. Satan's thinking, you know what, I can't get the guy to get on my program, we'll just kill him. It reminds me of the old Brer Rabbit thing. Oh, please don't throw me in the briar patch. We're going to kill him. Okay. And when you do, you have now by your own hands sealed your fate. In the heavenly place, it's a done deal. But look, as far as his program with the earth, what Satan is doing, even though the cross could be considered a setback for him, you understand he believes that what he is doing and what he has earned a right to do and will do out here is still on track. He doesn't see that as an end. We look at it and we go, he can read the Bible too. Why didn't he just throw in the towel? Because everything he's been working toward, he is still going to get to do. He still sees that, which is why your Father is asking us as his sons and daughters to take those works of darkness that the adversary is utilizing to fuel the darkness of his night and have us cast them off. We're actually going to get to impact what Satan and his policies of evil are producing in this world, which is why you're going to be attacked. Do you remember what he says as soon as he says, let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and let us do what? Why do you put on armor? Because as soon as you cast off his works of darkness, there is going to be a retaliatory attack. And God says, so here's what you need to do. As soon as you do this, you might want to suit up. Because there is going to be a strike back. But here's the wonderful thing about it. Your Heavenly Father is going to detail for you, for all of us, exactly the form that is going to take. You're not going to be taken by surprise. He's not throwing you out in the middle of the Colosseum and he says, oh yeah, the gates are going to open up and the lions are coming out. Good luck. He's going to give you some armor. And that's why it's so important for this stuff to effectually work in us. This is not the game that you are so used to playing. Let me say it for me. Not the game I was so used to playing when I was going to church and we would talk about stuff that had no real practical consequence in my life. It was all just some idea. And it was great to think about, but it didn't really cost me anything in the long run. This, you want to engage in hand-to-hand combat against the adversary, this is where it is. And by the way, I know I keep talking and I keep eating into my time on the next section, but let me just say that there is going to be a genuine tendency to look at this conflict, this contention, but as we labor with our Father in his operation against Satan and his policies of evil. Father says, you really want to put on the armor and go to war with me against my adversary and make him your adversary? You really want to do that? Okay, then here's how we're going to do it. There is going to be this tendency for us to talk all about it and never do anything about it. And we can't afford to do that. So I'll illustrate it to you this way. Let's suppose we send our kids off to school, and the first the first 3 months of the school year, we ask our kids every day, what'd you do today? What'd you do today? And they talk to us about the importance of school. And if we don't get educated, it limits what we're going to be able to do later and even provide for ourselves and to be able to function properly in this society. And Mom and Dad, I realize just how important schooling is. When you first hear that, you're thinking, it's a miracle. Or what did you do with my kid? Or something like that. But you hear them. But for 3 months, that's what they come back and talk about, how important school is and what advantages they'll have because of getting a good education. And then in the next 3 months, what they do is they talk to them about the kinds of subjects they're going to be studying. And so the kids come back for the next 3 months and say, oh, you know what, there's some wonderful subjects out there. There's a thing called math. Oh, we learn we're going to use math in everyday life in all kinds of ways. It's important for balancing our bank account and it's important for keeping up with, all the things that revolve. And then there's this thing called grammar in English, and we're going to learn how to write. Oh, this is going to be great. And for 3 months, they talk about that. And then in the last 3 months, they come home and they talk about, I'm just pulling this off the top of my head, which means I'm in trouble now. But they talk about another aspect of it. But at the end of the year, when you say to your kids, can you give me your ABCs? Can you count to 10? Can you spell this? Can you write this? They go, oh no, I don't know how to do any of that. But but I can tell you how important it is to be educated. Do you see what that is? We're talking all about it.
And it still goes up to the candidates today.
You know what? I didn't know if anybody was going to pick up on that, but I'm just saying, we talk all about issues, but we never do any of them. This is the issue of laboring with your Father, and He's not just for us sitting around talking about, we're going to give the old adversary a black eye. I tell you, I'm going to take those works of darkness, and I'm going to rip them. I'm just, and we all talk about it, and we get all fired up about it, and we feel good about it, and we go off, and we actually just fool ourselves into thinking we've actually done something. And the adversary is happy as a lark about that. Because as long as you don't actually do anything about what He's doing and producing in this dispensation of grace, He's not worried about us a bit. So now that the godly thinking is being installed in us, now we have to turn our attention to, let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. And when we do that, you're going to do, okay, I'm going to keep talking. We're going to eat our break. Okay, did y'all enjoy your break? Okay. All right, we need to take a short break.